And then like I kind of just every now and then.
How's it looking? You're just gonna DM me the link? What'd you say?
I said, assuming Twitter will.
You just email it to me, it's fine. It works.
I need to email you the.
What?
Okay, try that, Ryan.
What?
Try this. I just sent you a link.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it is. My wife and I were like, they're all like paid off. They're like, just keep it until they die. I think that's appropriate.
How long you want to take for?
Matt Kane said he'll fill in for Chris Lake. So we'll just see.
My question was, how long?
I don't know if anyone
How long do you want to talk for? How long do you want to talk for?
I could probably be done in like 5-6 minutes.
I know.
Well, I mean, do you want me to take like 10?
Sure, yeah, whatever.
Okay.
I mean, like we're gonna switch at like slide 10-ish.
Yeah. I'm just, you know. I can try to fit any time.
Talk what you want. Like get through like slide 9 or 10, and then I'll take over. And then if you want to add stuff, just pick back up. I think the appeal of our conferences is less formal. That's what I said.
What is the RIT? What was the email? ATC submission?
Yeah, Red Hat.
Oh yeah, Red Hat. Okay.
So you want me to tweet this out?
Does it work?
Oh yeah, it's probably check.
Yeah.
Tired, man.
I should have just sent that too. Seems to be working.
It's working. All right, I'll clear it out, and then we'll.
So like we don't want to do it tonight. We don't want to just do this.
Okay, we just shared it. Just a couple minutes.
We're definitely on the side from wearing suits to wearing
We only in like the first one and the second group, right? Yeah. Also, Ben Resnick said he would talk for a couple minutes if we needed to, like Q&A. And he used to be a scout. He was like an analyst. So we had talked about having a speaker, but then we just filled up before he got back. So. Okay. You ready?
I'm not really sure why.
Oh, Chris is here. Good.
Okay.
Yeah. You made it. Yeah, it's 8:30.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's get going.
Do you have the presentation up? And are you doing? Good morning, everybody. Welcome to RIT. Thank you for coming to our fourth conference. We have a lot more talks and no panels because you guys submitted what looks like good work. I mean, I guess we'll see. So anyway, thank you all for coming out. I'm excited to listen to everybody, and I don't want to take too much time. So if Ian can come down for the first talk, we can get started. Yeah. I guess I should have said I'm Matt Hoffman. I'm an associate professor in the School of Mathematical Sciences at RIT, and I'm one of the organizers of this conference, along with Ryan.
4 years in, we're still screwing up the intro. Good job, guys. All right, so the stream should be up. If anybody's watching on the stream, if there's anything wrong with it, just let us know. Try to fix it, but it should be all right. For those that I'm Ryan Stimson, one of the organizers here as well. So thank you all for coming. I'm looking forward to get to everything today. Because we have so many talks, we are gonna try to be a little strict with the time and keep everything on schedule here. Okay, so Matt will be there. I'll be sitting right over here. You know, if we give you a quick wave, you know, that's 5 minutes left. Hurry up. You know, and then if we make any wild or gestures, it's time to wrap it up. Okay. So first off is Ian Tulloch.
One more thing, right? The other difference from this year, right, is that we're doing questions after. There is some time for questions after. So yeah. Okay. So you know, there is some time for questions after the talk. So that's the other change. We didn't build that into the schedule.
Okay. All right. Roaring start here. All right, so Ian's interest in hockey has turned into obsession over the years. To help him cope, he started the analytics-based hockey podcast, the Leafs Geek Podcast, which a lot of people in this room have appeared on as guests. He began writing about hockey a few years ago on Reddit for fun, got picked up by the Leafs Nation a few months later, and has recently stumbled into a job with The Athletic, as has everyone here. He enjoys Italian food.
It says, I enjoy Italian food, long walks on the beach, and controlled zone exits. So that's my Tinder bio. All right, beautiful. All right, so as you just heard, my name is Ian Tulloch. I do a little nerdy analytics podcast. I work for The Athletic along with all of you, and here to talk to you about transitional play styles of NHL defensemen, as that slide says. So I think one of my favorite aspects of the new research that we're doing right now is trying to figure out ways of quantifying chemistry and trying to see which play styles work with other different types of play styles. And my inspiration for this was actually something that Ryan did back. Perfect. And this was one of my favorite pieces that I read. Do I need both microphones, by the way? Okay.
No.
So, is this one on?
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. That makes my life a lot easier. Oh, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So I'll just talk like this and everyone can hear me. So this is one of my favorite pieces that Ryan did. I believe he did it about a year ago. And he looked at different play styles based on the shot assists that a forward had, based on the number of shots that they were generated. And through clustering analysis, there was a lot of other data in there that include transitional plays. Don't create a lot of shot assists. Don't really create a lot of goals. And I guess that's not too shocking of a realization, but I think what we really learned is that passing really, really matters when it comes to driving offense. The defensive types is an interesting takeaway. The all-around types in this study, there were only about 11 of them, if I remember correctly. Most of them were elite players, and there were a few players who were in this group who had a very small sample. So you had like the Drew Doughties, your Erik Karlssons, your very good players, and then someone who had like a really small sample, who did really well in that small sample, but over a larger sample, they probably wouldn't stay around with the truly elite. And when it comes to the transitional play, volume shooters and puck movers had very similar numbers in this study. So it was interesting when it came to passing versus shooting from defensemen. But I'm very interested in transitional play for defensemen. I'm obsessed with zone exits, zone entries, all the stuff that Corey Snyder does for his manual tracking. He's a god. I love him so much. I played around with his data. I played around with CJ Turturro's vizzes. I'm on there way more often than I'd like to admit. And I love playing around with transitional data. So I kind of wanted to take the idea that Ryan went with here and just apply it to transitional play for defensemen. So let's start off with, what do we know about transitional play? What's the previous research taught us? And I think the most important piece that was done in 2013 taught us that zone entries really matter. We learned that you can generate twice as much offense off of a controlled entry versus an uncontrolled entry. What that means is that if you carry the puck in with possession, you're going to generate twice as much shots, twice as much goals as someone who dumps the puck in. And intuitively, that makes a bit of sense because you have to dump it in, you'd have to go back and retrieve the puck before you can begin, generating offense again. Whereas if you carry the puck in yourself, you're in a prime position to generate the offense. So as this relates to defensemen, if zone entries really matter, if I'm defending a zone entry, I don't want you to get a clean zone entry. I want to take away space, control my gaps, and force you to dump that puck in. So naturally, zone denials and transition are very important. Forcing the opposition to dump it in, very important. Zone exits also really matter. Alex Novet has done some excellent research here. I know last year his piece at the Rochester Analytics Conference, he taught us that controlled zone exits lead to more controlled zone entries, which, as we know from Eric Tulsky's great research, lead to more shots. So if you're getting out of your zone with possession of the puck, you're more likely to get into the offensive zone with possession of the puck. Intuitive, it makes sense, but it's important to know that we have the data to back up these assertions. So you may have seen these before. These are my favorite things to play around with. CJ Turturro also has some incredible vizzes that I wanted to show you, but I know I just spent too much time talking about them. I'll let him talk about those for you. But my favorite charts are these ones when it comes to evaluating defensemen, because I feel like it does a really good job of showing you who's getting out of the zone with control. So at the bottom there, it says possession exit percentage. The further you are to be on the other side because they don't move the puck that well. When it comes to zone denials, the higher you are, the better you are at forcing dump-ins. The lower you are, the more of an open blue line, the more you back up onto your goal. As you can see, Roman Polak shown in the bottom left corner there, gives up a lot of space in transition D, doesn't get out of the zone of possession. In my opinion, doesn't really help drive play in his team's direction. Lou Lamoriello may or may not agree. So what I wanted to do for this analysis, I wanted to break it down into 4 simple types. As you saw in the last charts, there are 4 little boxes there, and I wanted to define them as transitional styles when it came to defensemen. So I played a lot of NHL growing up, EA Sports, NHL 18, 17, 16, and played it all my life. And the player types I went with are player types that I've heard there before. I feel like it would be intuitive. So if you're good at getting the puck out of your zone and you're good at denying zone entries, you are a two-way defenseman, according to this analysis. If you are good at getting out of the zone with possession and don't do a great job controlling your gaps and allow a lot of carried entries, you're an offensive defenseman. So for some examples, a two-way defenseman, Erik Karlsson, Drew Doughty, they get out really well, but in transition, they don't control their gaps too well, and they allow quite a few of the controlled entries. Defensive defensemen, for the purposes of this study, pertain to defensemen who get out of the zone with control not very well, don't move the puck that well, but are very good at denying zone entries. On the Leafs, that's someone like Ron Hainsey. Around the league, Aaron Ekblad fit this description. I found it pretty interesting that Dustin Byfuglien fit that description. And you'll see some more names throughout this study, but it's guys who don't move the puck very well, but they are very good at controlling your gaps in transition and forcing the opposition to dump it in. And then the last one, I was joking around with Ryan, should I call them bad players if they're not good at either thing? Should I call them quote unquote safe players? I went with dependent. I felt like that was a bit nicer way of framing it. But basically, if you don't get out of the zone with control well and you don't deny zone entries very well, I have to ask, what are you doing as a defenseman? Are you helping drive the play transitionally? I don't think you are. And just if you're looking at these slides afterwards, good relates to above average and poor relates to below average. Now let's get into how I defined that. I used Corey Snyder's data because he's amazing and tracks hockey games all throughout the night. If you see him on Twitter at 4 a.m., he's probably looking at a Dallas versus Florida game, and he's taking a picture of the goalie's face on the bench. It's beautiful, it's amazing stuff. And I chose 250 combined minutes from the 2 years, from 2016 and 2017. So hypothetically, if you had 150 minutes one year and 100 minutes next year in this tracking project, that's 250 minutes combined, you would be in my study. If you had less than that, you didn't meet the cutoff, I'm sorry. Travis Dermott, you're still a good hockey player. But the reason I chose 250 is because I figured most metrics start to normalize around 15 to 20 games, and most defensemen play about 15 minutes with each other at even strength. So that's about between 225, 300 minutes. I figured 250 was a nice clean number, but it is arbitrary. You can pick a higher number, you can pick a lower number. I went with 250. If you're doing this research in the future, you can totally play around with that. Now when it comes to defining what is someone who's good at zone exits, I wanted to look at both controlled zone exit percentage, which is the efficiency that you're getting out of the zone with, but I also wanted to look at how many touches per 60 you're getting in the defensive zone. And basically that relates to any exit attempt that you're making, whether it's a flip off the glass, whether it's a pass that results in a turnover, whether it's an icing, anytime you had the puck. And the reason that I wanted to combine both of them is because, let's say for example, you're in the 51st percentile of controlled zone exit percentage, but you're in the 2nd percentile of exit attempts. You're deferring to your partner all the time. They have to do all the work. And the few times that you are looking to move the puck up the ice, it's probably a good opportunity to move the puck. So if you're in the 51st percentile of controlled zone exit percentage, but you never have the puck, are you really an above average puck mover? In my opinion, no, which is why I played around with the weights. And what I decided to do is I percentile ranked them both, and I weighted controlled zone exit percentage, so efficiency, twice as heavily as volume. Again, that's arbitrary. You can definitely play around with that. Some more complex analysis might show that there's a better way to weight it, but that's what I went with. And then you get a score from 0 to 100. Makes life very easy for people to observe it. Nice clean numbers. 50 is average. Did the same thing with defending the opposition from coming into controlled zone entry. I felt that the rate at which you force dump ins, so basically if you force dump ins 50% of the time and allow carried entries 50% of the time, I figured that's probably the most important stat to identify who's allowing dump ins, who's allowing carry ins. But breakups per 60 I think are also important. What a breakup is, if you get stick on puck and force a turnover and the puck is then loose, that's a breakup. And I think that really matters. But what I decided to do is I weighted controlled entry against percentage twice as heavily. It's arbitrary. I'd love to see some future research to see if there's a better way to weight it. But what I ended up with gave me some results that made sense to me intuitively and made sense when I looked at the numbers. So that's what I decided to go with. To give you some examples here, the best zone exit scores in this study, a lot of good puck movers. You got Carlson, you got PK Subban, you got Schmidt, Gerard, Klingberg, guys that make sense up there. The one name that probably pops out is Anthony D'Angelo, and I find that his name pops up in a lot of these studies. He's bad at a lot of things on the ice and off the ice, but he's very good at moving the puck. And maybe it's because of sheltered usage, maybe it's because he always states it out himself and isn't actually trying to make the best play for his team, just for himself. It's tough to say, but it's worth noting that in the data, he moves the puck very well, gets out of his zone with possession. Looking on the other side of things, the guys in the league who are the best at denying zone entries, some names that make sense, PK Subban, you have Matt Dumba there, Dmitry Orlov controls the gaps really well. And then you have some names where you'll be like, what? Josh Georges, Eric Greiber. Like slow foot speed that results in them not driving results too well. But when it comes to this specific area of the game, denying zone entries, they do a good job with their long sticks and their position, forcing the opposition to dump the puck in. They're not plus players when they're on the ice, but they do have plus skills that help them in some components of the game. For control zone exit percentage and touches per 60, magical that you combine both of them together. Great stuff. And then on the other side of the puck, a lot of names of guys who don't drive results really well. And when you're trying to figure out, well, why doesn't that player drive results well? When I watch Nikita Zaitsev play, I see a fast skater who has a lot of great tools. Well, in transition, he's giving the opposition the blue line. They can skate in freely against him. Jay Bowmeister, very similar, has a lot of great tools, 6'4", can skate like the wind, but he gives up a lot of space in transition. The one name on this list that pops out to me is Brandon Montour, because even though he gives up a lot of space in transition, moves the puck really, really well. And as you'll see from the results of this study, a good puck mover can help compensate for their poor gap control in transition. We'll definitely get into that. So here's our sample, and the reason I liked it is because we have pretty much more or less the same number of people in each category. You got 59 two-way defensemen, 52 offensive, 53 defensive, and 57 Roman Polacks. It's great stuff. We had 226 pairings in total of guys who played at least 250 minutes together. I didn't want to have guys who only played a couple games together and dominated, or guys who only played a few games together and got completely destroyed. I wanted to have a decent sample of guys who had a lot of the time to develop some chemistry together, and as we know, small sample sizes can give us wonky results. So again, I went with the 250 limit, and in total, there were over 145,000 combined minutes of players that I looked at in this study. The tool that I used was I went on Corsica and I went to the pairings option where it shows you players who were on the ice at the same time, and it's a very fun tool. I love using that. Manny's not here, but Corsica is a great resource to look at hockey analytics. I'm sure all of us use it all the time. So who wants to see the results of this study? Yeah? Unfortunately, you're going to need to subscribe to The Athletic. I'm so we have a 40% offer on right now, limited time offer, so get it while you can. But in all seriousness, here are the results of the study. It's a lot of information to take in. So instead of just throwing you at this and breaking it down one by one, I thought I'd start with the two-way defensemen. So let's look at this. Two-way defensemen perform the best with other two-way defensemen and offensive defensemen. I found that to be pretty intriguing. I looked at shot metrics because they're the most predictive right now, they're the most repeatable in a small sample. I used goal metrics because we have 10,000 plus minutes of the pairings together in this study. And I feel like goal metrics in a small sample are obviously not ideal. Save percentage relative, despite what some people say isn't a great stat. But I think that when you have a large sample, like say over 10,000 minutes, over 5,000, 6,000 shot attempts when that guy's on the ice, I feel like that gives you a bit of something to play around with. Not necessarily the most telling, but I thought it was good to include. And as you can see, defensive defensemen didn't do that good with two-way, and dependent naturally were the worst with them. Makes sense, obviously, that two-way would be the best because Erik Karlsson, Drew Doughty, guys who move the puck and defend the rush really well, good players. Roman Polacks of the world, probably not going to drive results really well. The interesting thing here, I find, is that offensive defensemen do significantly better with two-way defensemen than defensive defensemen. And this is going to be a common theme that you see throughout this. Looking at dependent defensemen. There was a small sample of dependence with dependence, and I think that's a good idea. You probably shouldn't be playing Roman Polak with Andrew McDonald. It's probably not going to be a great pairing. But as you can see, they didn't do too well together. And they also did very poorly along with defensive defensemen. That pattern is not the same with offensive defensemen. As you can see, they actually drove goals positively, which is very surprising considering you're playing with a guy who isn't moving the puck well, isn't controlling his gaps well. When you play them with a player who's good at moving the puck and good at getting out of the zone. Defensive defensemen and other defensive defensemen, even though there was a small sample, across the board didn't do very well together. I guess you need someone to help move the puck out of your zone, otherwise you're always playing on defense. So when you play defensive defenseman with an offensive defenseman, they help get you the puck out of your zone, and you get shots, you get goals a lot better than you do with other types of players, even two-way defensemen, which I found very intriguing. The most wonky results in this study come from the offensive defensemen. They don't play good with dependent defensemen, makes sense. They don't play well with two-way defensemen, makes sense. They have good shot metrics with other offensive defensemen, but not the best goal metrics. Is that a sample size issue? Is that a play style issue where two very fast skating defensemen are good at getting the puck up the ice, or making mistakes that the shot metrics aren't able to catch, or maybe there's more pre-shot movement and odd man rushes against? It's tough to say. I'd love to see more data on it. I'd love for player tracking to finally be publicly available so we can dive into these questions. But it's interesting to me that defensive defensemen had better goal metrics with offensive defensemen than another puck mover, despite the fact that puck movers consistently did better across the board than defensive defensemen. So this is the results. If you're looking at it in total, you can look at it afterwards for fun to see who's where on those charts naturally, two-way defensemen are in the top right, dependent defensemen are in the bottom left, offensive defensemen in the bottom right, defensive defensemen top left. So you can play around with those afterwards. The slides will be available. But I think it's important to talk about what are the key takeaways from this study. To me, two-way defensemen elevate their partner's play. That's not news. We expected Erik Karlsson, Drew Doughty, PK Subban to elevate the play of whoever they play with. Dependent players, guys who don't move the puck well, guys who don't defend the rush very well, are constant drag on their partner's numbers. Again, this isn't news to anyone. You probably already knew that. What I found really interesting is that offensive defensemen across the board perform much better than defensive defensemen. The exception is the goal metrics with other offensive defensemen. And that's something I'd really like to look into with future data. I find it really interesting. But I think the end of the day here, the take-home point is that this study suggests that controlled zone exits are more valuable than denying controlled zone entries, and that moving the puck is more valuable than stopping the puck as a defenseman. So there's some interesting takeaways you can take from that, how you evaluate players, who you look to pair together. Julius Honcook, who might be available this offseason, these are guys that you might want to acquire, whereas the defensive defensemen typically don't do as well as you would expect. So definitely something to take into account in the future. I'd like to see some more complex analysis than what I did. Obviously, I did a very simplistic way. I had a bit arbitrary ways of defining my definitions. Maybe some clustering techniques, maybe some machine learning techniques. I'd like to adjust for team effects because Ron Hainsey on Carolina had decent zone exit numbers because Carolina moves the puck really well. They have a great structure, they have a great system. When he came to Toronto, he did not move the puck very well. And I think it comes down to a lot of system effects in play. There's a lot of structure in there. So much like raw Corsi isn't as good as Corsi relative to your teammates, I'd like to see zone exits relative to teammates, zone denials relative to teammates. Could be a very interesting stat in the future. And of course, the problem here is that larger samples are what we want, but Corey only has so many hours in a day to track manual data. Apparently he needs sleep and food and to go to the bathroom. I don't know what these things are, but until player tracking is publicly available, we're relying on one man to do so much work for us, and he's a beautiful man. I love him so much, but we need more data. That's what it comes down to in hockey analytics. We need more data before we can come to any greater conclusions. And that's the end of my
Okay. All right, so CJ, come down. We'll get ready for the next one. In the meantime, we'll take a couple questions for Ian, those that have.
Okay, so a question for Ian. The shots and goal numbers that we saw right now, were they score adjusted?
Yes, all the numbers were zone, score, and venue adjusted. It was on Corsica, so when you hit the adjust button there, it adjusts for all those factors.
Okay, and were they adjusted for like, I don't know, something like forward quality of teammate or something like that?
No, they were not adjusted for that. We're adjusted for quality of competition or quality teammate. That's probably the toughest thing that we have right now is adjusting for that. There's some great regression models out there right now. I'm sure you're going to hear some presentations about how to adjust for quality teammate and quality competition. But I was just using the data that was available on Corsica. So when you click the adjusted button, here are the numbers that popped up there for the on-ice results.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Ian. All right, so CJ Tuturo is our next presenter. CJ is a 26-year-old mathematics teacher. He graduated from Penn State, and he's been writing about the most popular team in the league, the New Jersey Devils, for the last 5 years. Overall, about the Jersey. CJ and I overlapped a bit when I was writing there as well. So he's a good guy. He's going to talk about the state of any microstats in the NHL at this point.
Everyone hear me? Or am I good? All right, cool. All right, so let's get started. Present review isn't working, so I don't have some of the notes that I'm working on here, but it'll be fine. I know more or less what I did, I think. All right, so I'm going to be presenting on the state of NHL microstats as we are right now. So it's a little bit of your programs. I think it says past, present, and future. That's around what I'm going for. Trying to figure out what we already know, what we're doing right now in microstats, both good and bad, and where we should be headed in the near future with it. So I'm going to give you guys a brief history of some of the microstats that I'm going to be talking about. Then I'm going to talk about what we already know about them, the research that's been done, some of the stuff that Ian actually just talked about. Then I'll move on to right now, how we're using it for player evaluation, whether that's good or bad. And then I'm going to talk about what I'm doing right now, which is looking at repeatability and predictivity of some of these metrics. And then lastly, I'll close out with talking about where we should be headed in the future with this information and how we should be using it to do whatever we want to with them. So there's two of mine, what are microstats? What is a CJ? This is more or less what a CJ is. I have takes on Twitter that are varying in popularity. For instance, my French by power rankings you might have seen. I wrote all about the jersey, as Ryan said. That's at the lower right over there. I've done research varying in just straight Devils coverage to more, larger reaching. That one is it's on the upper right, which is the A3Z comparison tool. A3Z is short for all free zone metrics, which is what Corey's been tracking. Ian referenced it as well. Obviously, all the information from that comes from Corey Snyder's information there. So first of all, what are microstats? I'm going to be referencing these a lot of times, so we should probably clarify what it is that I mean by this. The formal definition that I'm going to be using for the purposes of this presentation is that it's the records of all events that are involved in the progression from a defensive possession to an offensive shot attempt. Informally, it's kind of just anything that the NHL doesn't track themselves because there's a lot of that. So we need to have some way to reference something that's not tracked by them. But along the lines of those formal definitions, the things that we'll be looking at in this presentation are zone exits, entries, entry defense, and then shot assists. Note that all of those things are individual metrics, not on-ice metrics. For the duration of this presentation, any all-free zone metric that I cite is individual, right? And that's going to be important because we're talking about how an individual statistic will affect on-ice results. This is not talking about how, Corsi would affect goals in the future. We're talking about how something that particular player does might affect what occurs on the ice as a whole. And so it could be potentially a really powerful thing, but we don't know if the power's there yet. So that's what I'm going to try to get into, right? So this is what the progression that I just mentioned is going to look like. We got orange team versus purple team, right? You have an entry defense you're the orange dude who's trying to enter the zone against him. Then either succeeds, fails, and then we'll try to exit the zone. So this was a defensive possession. Now they're trying to push it back into the offensive zone. Then that, if it works, will result in a zone entry, which will then result in someone, hopefully, if they're listening to Ryan's research, setting up a shot assist, and then finally taking the shot. So that shows you what the progression is, what the formal definition we referenced there was, the progression from a defensive possession into an offensive shot attempt. And every element along that path is a microstat. So what we know, the current state of the research, there's a ton more here that I'm just going to try to breeze through it. But we know, among other things, we know carrying or controlled entries at large. Carrying is a little bit quicker, so you might hear me say carry dump. Normally what I'm going to mean is controlled, uncontrolled. Carrying creates over twice as many shot attempts as dumping. That one has been found and refound several times. That one's one of the first things we figured out, and it's been replicated, those studies. That's definitely true. Last year, well, actually this year, at the most recent analytics conference, I think it was Van Tech, Alex found that about a quarter of all goals came from failed exits, and about 40% of them came from poor exits, which would be if you exit the zone, but it just came right back, right? So that's a lot. So that implies that exits might have something to do with defense in addition to offense. And then Ryan has found in a series of articles that I would say culminate at an expected goals model that pre-shot passing info is the most powerful expected goals model that we have today. There's a ton of things that we haven't. That'll be next. There's a ton of things I didn't get a chance to reference here, but I'm not going to go through every one of them. You guys can follow those links at your own time. This PowerPoint will be published, so you can follow those links. So yeah, we finally have important data. Now we want to use them to evaluate all the players that we know about. I have a player that I love, but of course he hates him. So now I finally get to prove that he's as good as I always thought he was. That kind of thing, right? So player evaluation, right? We would find something like this, and you could either confirm suspicions, or you can use this to write particularly troll-worthy blog posts. I don't know anything about that. And then you can, and you might use this to say, well, we know that entries matter, we know that exits matter, and so we can say that Lars Eller is better at doing these two things that matter than James Van Riemsdyk is, so maybe he's better. Until you look at the on-ice stats, which have been studied for years. And you say that, and you see that they're relative to teammate Corsi expected goal results would all be counter to that point. So why could this be? We'll look into that a little bit. High five fashion. So this is another example of something that did not register with what we would have researched in on-ice metrics. There's multiple reasons this could be the case. These are defenders. It's a slightly different situation. And also 5 patch and Aho as a very low games trash total. So yeah, we found missing link to player evaluation. Now everything that now we know everything that we need to know about it, right? This is what was missing from hockey, except obviously not really. There's a lot of things that we have yet to explain, and we need to look into a few different things about how these metrics are operating and if we can trust them. Sorry, covering this mic isn't really doing much for that. So right now, with regards to repeatability and predictivity, what can we say? All the data for this came from a mix of Corey's tracking data and from Offside Review, which is Harris Schomer's website, 36 Hobbit on Twitter. The reason I use that website is because he has an option where you can aggregate by game, as opposed to getting just like a raw play-by-play, or as opposed to getting season aggregations. So since I had already created game logs for the A3C stats, I could just run a match on the game IDs, so it was easiest that way. So just to explain why I'm using the data that I'm using. All right, so warning, this is a really dense set of 5 slides, but if you guys can get through with me, then there's going to be a GIF of a baby getting licked by 2 puppies at the end, okay? So if we can just get through this hard part together, then we'll be able to reap the rewards afterwards. All right. So the statistics that are going to be referenced here are everything on the left is A3Z stats, solely use shot assists and contributions. Contributions are shot assists plus shot attempts. Entries, we'll look at controlled entries per 60, controlled entries percentage, and then controlled entry percentage with fails. So controlled entry percentage is just carries versus dumps, or carries passes versus dumps. Controlled entries with fails includes failed entry attempts. I had a suspicion that that might be important. This doesn't jive with some of the research that's been done. We'll find out whether or not that actually was important. Exits, controlled exits per 60, controlled exit percentage, and exit success. So exit success is just successes versus fails. Controlled exit percentage is controlled versus uncontrolled. Entry defense, same as entries. On traditional on-ice metrics, we'll look at Corsi, expected goals, and goal score. Again, reminder that the expected goals model is the Offside Review model. So I want to answer 2 questions first about repeatability. When did the all 3 zone stats stabilize, and are they repeatable? All right. So all of these statistics that you're going to see were run on 3 teams. There were 3 teams that had 60 plus games. So that everything I'm about to show you comes with that caveat. I will personally add to this. I will rerun these results as we get more data, and we'll see if any of the conclusions might change. But this is basically you guys have probably seen performance curves like this. This says the number of predicted games on the bottom, so how many games you were training on, and then the y-axis tells you how repeatable it was, so how much that correlated to the remaining games. So if you look at, say, right around here, this would tell you that after 30 games, there was an R value, not R squared, by the way, of around 0.3 for goal score percentage, right? So we can see this is the kind of the benchmark, right? This was for on-ice metrics, and we're going to be comparing our new statistics to these. So we can see for forwards and defenders, for both of them, this is entries. Entries had a significantly higher repeatability than they did for on-ice metrics. Also, they all had a relatively similar repeatability. For forwards, you'll see a peak there at 30 games. That does not mean that they necessarily stabilize at 30 games. 30 is the halfway point in this data set because there were 60 games that I took from each of the three teams. So that is merely when you're going to have the most, the optimized amount of training versus testing. So if we added more games, it's possible that could have kept rising. If you see a spike at any point before that midway point, that's going to mean that actually is where it stabilizes. For instance, in defenders, you can see a kind of little harsh corner right here. A lot of times I refer to that as an elbow. And that's going to be, you would say that that's probably where defenders' repeatability stabilizes. This is for exits. We can see exit success doesn't stabilize particularly well when compared to exits per 60 and exit percentage. And once again, we see defenders elbowing at the same rough point and topping out at a higher rate than forwards. These repeatability metrics are around 0.8, 0.9, which is really, really high of a correlation. That's saying that there's the Pearson correlation is at 0.9 for predicting the future exits per 60 or exit percentage from prior exits per 60 or exit percentage, which is obviously very reliable, right? And by about 20 games, we're most of the way there for defenders in particular. Forwards, it tops out a little bit lower, and it looks like it's still learning over most of the duration of this data set. Entry defense, forwards data has been essentially useless for these purposes. Defenders, once again, elbow at 20 and top out around 0.75. And lastly, shot contributions, shot assists have a much more reliable repeatability than shot contributions, indicating probably that individual shot attempts is a less reliable statistic than individual shot assists. Not entirely surprising. So when do they stabilize? They stabilize around 20 games. Forwards might need 30 or more. Not really clear to me personally whether or not that's the case. Like I said, I will add data to this as we move on. And we'll see if that might come down a little bit. Second, are they repeatable? Yes, they are definitely repeatable. Almost all of the all-three zone statistics were more repeatable than traditional on-ice metrics, right? Which I guess isn't surprising. On-ice is going to rely on both what you do and what your teammates do, whereas an individual statistic will rely chiefly on what you do, which you would expect to be more repeatable. It's easier to predict what one person is going to do than an entire team. The second, that was reliability or repeatability. So now we know that they are consistent, but do they predict anything that we care about? And for the things that we care about, I'm going to be using core C4 percentage, expected goal percentage, and goal score percentage. So are they predictive of those things for forwards? Are they predictive of those things for defensemen? And which are the most helpful in predicting future events? Are teams' scheme and usage important? So this is the really dense part. I'm not going to go into it in a really high degree. I'm just going to highlight some important things. For individual teams, you can see it differs whether or not these things were important. For the Blue Jackets, for instance, you can see there's a very high correlation. These dark blue means high correlation. The columns are the all-three zone statistics. The rows are the on-ice statistics. The top three rows are the ones you're most interested in. Those are the percentage ones. So that would be these three rows right here, all right? And you can see that for Columbus, it was very dark, and also their shot assists matter a lot. For Philly, their shot contributions mattered a lot. For Dallas, neither mattered. So already we have an answer to whether teams matter. It seems that it does. The different teams' applications of these philosophies might impact their on-ice results in different ways. So this is maximum predictivity by position. What I mean by maximum is if you envision those curves that I graphed on the previous slides, take the peak of them, all right? So by the time they've reached full repeatability or full predictivity in this case, what did they top out at? And for forwards, you can see that the on-ice metrics, this little dark section here, is still much more predictive of future results than anything over here. A couple of other interesting things though. Exits seem to be the most important of those for forwards, which isn't necessarily what you would expect. For defenders, shot assists matter a lot. So passing to people that would then subsequently generate shots matters a lot. There could be a team issue there. It could be that defenders on teams with better forwards are going to necessarily get shot assists because just a normal pass ends up being a shot assist if the guy who passed you shoots, right? And so they also have a little bit darker results here than the forwards. And they also have worse on-ice predictivity. So that means that these might have a little bit more important information. And lastly, I checked, this is not on ice, this is relative. So this is, did this predict how well they did relative to their teammates? And now you can see really importantly for the defenders in particular, this dark blue line right across here that I'm highlighting, that line is the relative goals for differential. So that's goals for per 60 minus goals against per 60. And you can see a dark line there for most of the all three zone stats that does not exist in the that does not exist for Corsi or goals for, and even for expected goals for in the on-ice metrics, indicating that for defenders in particular, the all three zone statistics predict goal and shot results better than our existing on-ice metrics, which is really powerful considering it's something that just that defender did, as opposed to something that happened on the ice in general. So, can they predict future things we care about for forwards? There's a signal the on-ice metrics that exist are better. So you should not be using an all three zone statistics to say you can ignore his Corsi expected goal results because his on-ice A3Z results were really good. For defenders, there seems to be a lot of signal there. It could be because we had a couple of players in this particular data set, which was including, for instance, the Flyers and the Blue Jackets, which have probably two of the top best defensive pairings in the league that are both really good at A3Z and really good at on-ice results. So that could be affecting it. As I add data to this, I'm not fully confident in saying that for the long run, but in this data set, it mattered a lot for defensemen, especially given how low the bar was set using on-ice metrics. We aren't good at predicting defensemen right now. Generally speaking, I think people reference entries a little bit more. There might be some signal in exits that we aren't accounting for. Exits both help defensively and offensively. They move it out of the defensive zone, preventing shot attempts, and into the offensive zone. And our teams' scheme and usage important? Yes, extremely important. Teams matter, line lengths might matter. Yeah, we made it, right? There's a baby getting licked by puppies that I mentioned, right? So nice job, everyone, all of you guys, and me especially. So very briefly, the future of microstats. We should be looking into on-ice and relative results. I only looked at individual results. Line rate impact is likely going to be very important. Special teams, there's a special team project going on with the take-to-take tracking project, which Sean Ferris is currently running. Team-specific work like schemes and tactics. Ryan's doing a lot of that right now for the Athletic. Check out those articles. That's probably the best place to go. And obviously, this is all going to be much better if we finally get some tracking data, which a lot of other leagues seem to be wanting to do, and maybe not necessarily in the NHL, but maybe in the near future we can hope for something like that. So there's the main takeaways. It might be helpful for defender evaluation, might be very helpful for defender evaluation, given it's an individual predicting on ice. Exits and entries, both per 60 and percentages did have signal. So not just efficiency, but also volume. And most importantly, there's still a lot of work to do in this area. So everyone should be trying to do a lot of this because there's obviously a lot of signal here that we haven't quite figured out yet. That's it.
Yes, wait. So I haven't come down. While we're getting set up, I've been here for our first non-hockey talk. Your questions for CJ? Okay.
I was wondering if you'd looked at player age as a cross-reference for this, because I suspect that a 19-year-old wouldn't stabilize as quickly as a 25-year-old when you're counting the microstats, and whether including like a team like the Weathers, which puts players in way before they're ready, whether having those sorts of numbers in there is affecting the reliability.
Yeah, so the graphs that you saw were really kind of basic correlation. That's not really like a sophisticated regression model, so I did not use age as a co-predictor in any way there. I have some intuition about whether or not those things might stabilize, but I think that using just the games is at this point sufficient given the state of microstats as of right now. So I think that you might have more volume but less efficiency for some younger players like D'Angelo, but they might also just be efficient at it because they're younger and faster, right? So I have no strong intuition or indication that I would need to include that as a very high priority in the immediate regression models. I think that line 18 impact, et cetera, are a more immediate concern with what might be affecting these statistics.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you for the questions.
All right, any other questions? Okay, thanks, CJ.
Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Ivan Randamore, who's a statistician at St. Lawrence University in the truly upstate part of New York, as opposed to this not upstate part of New York, but western. His recent academic interests lie in applying machine learning and data science to both esports and sports, non-esport data, I suppose. His collaborator, Dr. Chumso Lee, is a computer scientist at St. Lawrence and is admittedly the better gamer of the two. But I've been here to talk to us anyway, so I'm going to pull this presentation up and we can get started.
All right, sounds okay. All right, so it looks like a little bit of the picture got a little bit messed up, but that's okay. It's not really covering anything important. So, and I guess we're gonna take a 20-minute break from hockey, and we're gonna really stretch this idea of general sports and sports here by talking about esports. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about a study I did with Dr. Lee using League of Legends. So one thing I'm not going to try to do is convince you fully that esports is actually sports, but I think there's a lot of similarities between, especially the way we analyze it and what kind of the goals are. So just to kind of bring it up, I thought just kind of a general definition of this, and there's no great definition of esports, but I found something I kind of liked from an article by Ray Stefani in the Statistics Magazine Significance from in March 2017. Where he kind of talks a little bit about the idea of how you have these different versions of sports now. You've got kind of classic physical sports, there's things like the mind sports like chess and those type of ideas, and merging into esports as well. So he had this kind of nice way of defining a physical sport. You can kind of see up there, I won't read the entire thing, but basically it is what you would expect it to be, with the idea that you have physical competitors and physical objects that are involved with the thing. And really, you can just kind of swap out those physical competitors and physical objects for an esport, and just say that you're now dealing with virtual competitors and virtual objects instead. But a lot of the same kind of goals and the same kind of play is kind of there as well. And you just might not break as much of a sweat, I suppose. And I guess I'm not necessarily good enough to have broken a sweat during this game besides just being nervous and I was letting my team down or something like that. So maybe just a little bit about this chart I appreciate, why would someone be interested in analyzing esports data in the first place? A lot of it comes down to it really has a lot of similarities to just sports data itself. With a couple of extra things that I think are especially interesting, you can get lots and lots of data if you know how to go and get it on your own, including at multiple levels of competition. So a lot of studies, they have like over 100,000 participants. We'll kind of see that, the one that I'm talking about today, we have like over 10 million participants with there and like 100 million matches. So it's a little bit different than a lot of like sports where you have a small number of participants or players involved with it, but you have like a lot of measures of it over and over again over the course of a season. You tend to have a lot of people that you're collecting data on, but you maybe only see them a couple of times through the entire data collection period. One of the other cool things about it is that if you can get like really highly competitive level of play down to casual matches. There are professional esports leagues out there that they're kind of building up a lot right now, and they're actually using a lot of sports and kind of professional sports models to help them I guess, go out there and make money, I suppose. That data is a little bit hard to come across at the same level, but you can get like, kind of, I guess I like to think of it as like the equivalent to like collegiate level play, like that quality play, all the way down to like the casual matches that you would expect to see at like hockey, athletics conference, pickup game type thing. So you can get like all these different types of things with it. Another thing that's kind of nice is that it actually has a lot of the shared goals with a lot of sports analytics studies. The way I like to think of it is that you kind of have this idea that you want to describe what's going on with on the ice or around the game or something like that. Use this to be able to then predict what's going on, and ultimately prescribe something so you can maybe get a competitive advantage, or you'll be able to eke out a little more money or something like that. One of the cool things with the way you can collect a lot of esports data is because of the fact that you can get this wide variety of competition. You might have the potential to be able to apply results to, I want to call them everyday folks. It's really just people who like play the game that you might be able to apply a little bit better as opposed to if you're analyzing like professional hockey players. Like you yourself might not be able to use that data when you're playing hockey because you're not at that same level. Another way of thinking about it might be more like if you use sports data to analyze for like fantasy sports, where you can like more apply your own kind of knowledge to be able to make yourself competitive advantage. Last one of the other these things is that so a lot of the dating models as well, just like you do with sports data as well. And there's one weird little thing not shown on there. But there's a lot of real changes can happen between competitive seasons. You also have a lot of in-game like balance patches that end up happening as well. Okay, so getting a little more specifically into the game that this study was about, League of Legends, or LoL for short. So League of Legends is part of the multiplayer online battle arena genre, or MOBA. It was released roughly 10 years ago, so I guess October 9 years ago, in 2009 by Riot Games. The basic idea is that you pick a champion of like, I think it's actually roughly 100 choices, and you form teams of 5, and you really just like bash it out and you try to destroy the other team's base. That's kind of the idea. And the way the main kind of mode that is used in League of Legends that you have what are called a map where you fight on 3 different lanes. You have kind of this no man's land called the jungle that you also are part of. So even if you haven't heard of it, it is actually one of the most popular esports games out there. Even though it's been around for a while, it's not necessarily the most, I guess, popular one, especially with like the big ones like Overwatch and Fortnite that came out recently. That you have like teenagers, that type of stuff that is crazy about it apparently. But it's still pretty popular, even though it has quite a bit of licensing power. So the next step towards kind of building into what the study was about, I want to define something called meta composition. So meta roles or meta composition are really just kind of basically the idea of community-defined roles within like a team. What we have in League of Legends is there's 5 different players that are on a team. So there's kind of naturally 5 different positions that are kind of used in the I guess, map over the game. So I just really want to briefly, I don't want to talk about what they all do, but I just want to define them because they're going to be kind of used to help us talk about team compositions later. So we have something called the solo top. I'm just going to label them as a T. They just kind of hang out and try to hold that top lane more or less by themselves. They tend to be kind of defensive build characters from that. We have what we call the jungler, so a J. They're kind of just like a roaming type player. We have the solo mid, so they kind of play by themselves in the middle lane for the most part. They're kind of able to hold that thing. They tend to be very damage focused. And then the bottom line, we actually have 2 different players that usually tend to be together. One of them called the AD carry, so AD here stands for attack damage. And they tend to be kind of really high on damage, but they're kind of like easy to kill, I guess. And because of that, they tend to have to play with the support, so the supports are like the classic healer that you see like in a video game. So this concept is, again, I didn't anticipate that apparently my resolution was very different than I could do in here. But yeah, you can probably guess as to what the end comes up next. So this meta idea is actually something pretty similar in a lot of sports too. So like if you think of the standard positions in basketball, like center, power forward, and so on, like there's no like rule that says you have to have those 5 people on the court at a time. But over the years, people have kind of found out that this is probably a good way of playing the game to kind of balance out what you need on the team. So it's the same thing that we had in the Legends, that over the years, like the players in the community have kind of found out that those are the 5, I guess, rules that seem to make a good team together. So this then leads into the research question of interest, or the 2 research questions of interest for this project. One was, how dominant is that meta composition in League of Legends itself? And is there any way you can break it? So if you can find some type of non-meta compositions that are actually better than it. So getting a little bit into the data collection process. So we used what are called the Riot Games, the official did this for the 2015 season because of like the array caps that they tried to do it free. It took us about 6 months or to like slowly kind of like crawl and like collect a lot of data. But we got a lot of it. We had over 10 million matches that we ended up getting with, and it included about 10 million participants. So 10 players on playing in a match, so 2 teams of 5 on each. So lots and lots of data, which was nice because we ended up kind of slicing it down by the different kind of levels of competition. A bit, so we have something called a Q type of these things, and it kind of broadly went into the competitive style games where you like play ranked versions of it, and then also the non-competitive or unranked, more casual style with that as well. And of most interest to us was the ranked competitive style, that kind of starting out to see what are the people who really know what they're doing, and as kind of esports keeps on getting bigger and that type of stuff, kind of broadening out to like what are the lesser nobodies that are just picking up the game and can see what they're doing something differently too. All right, so a little more about the kind of specifically about the variables that we collected. So this response variable in our study that we're mostly interested in was just that role that they were playing. So it kind of was 5 different categories that we had there. And we had 31 explanatory variables that we kind of developed and pulled out from the API and from the data collection that we had. Again, there's kind of some weird stuff going on here. So the API that we had only provided end-game information. So we didn't have information about like tracking the players throughout. That actually has changed recently. That you can now get that information, which is kind of cool. I'll talk a little bit about that at the very end. But at the time, it was only about like what did they accrue. It's like looking at a box score essentially of like a sports game. Sounds like it's a general thing. Like looking at a box score and just a pyramid type idea. So what we did is that we could have, because we only had that end game information, we thought that these statistics that they accrued during the game itself weren't really that interesting for being able to apply to someone making choices and for themselves. So we looked at what we call the build-related information, which we kind of classified into 2 different categories. One of them were what we call player spells, and this sounds like exceptionally nerdy when I talk about this. That we're already taking kind of like sports making it nerdy by doing analytics on it. I'm not kind of taking it like video games made it even nerdier by doing analytics on that. So these things are basically things that they make a choice at the beginning of the match. They're static throughout the entire time. They are often chosen with like kind of what your role is in mind, but they don't map perfectly to that. So what we also did is look at the different types of items that people kind of like purchased for their character throughout the game. These things can change throughout the match, and they're typically upgraded throughout the entire time. And so what we actually did, instead of focusing on like the specific item that they worked with, kind of thinking about like what attributes were they trying to build for. So are they building like a defensive type character? Are they building like kind of like offensive physical damage type character, or something that's based on speed or something like that? But the idea that as they're upgrading throughout, we're going to keep on getting better versions of those type of things. And again, if you have played any of these type of games, you kind of have it, you kind of know a general idea behind it. And that's what that last little concept cut off. Okay, so the first step towards, prepping the data that we had towards getting to our research questions in mind was just taking that data set and like with our 100 million participants that we had in there and 10 million matches, and actually like classifying these participant roles. So what we do is that we kind of just throw some machine learning stuff at it. We train into a support vector machine, SVM. And from this thing, we learn ourselves a pretty small subset of our total data using only 20,000 randomly selected teams. I kind of looked at or talked about based on something called Champion GG's primary role designation. So Champion GG is just like one of the popular fan sites for League of Legends. And what it does, it kind of provides some information about the standard ways to play most of the different champions or characters that are in there. And our thought was that we somehow need to get like a ground truth in there to be able to build and train like our model, but there's not really one that exists. So we're going to try to come up with something that seems like what people were trying to play that meta style. And the idea was that ranked teams, if there's 5 people going in there together, and they're making that choice to kind of pick one of each of those 5 categories, they are likely to be kind of specifically choose and do that meta idea with that. So we're kind of using them as close as we can get to the truth. It worked out pretty well actually for the results on the training data. After it was kind of fully tuned, that we had just under 97% of the predictor roles actually matched up with the primary role as well. And because of the way the tuning stuff worked, we didn't have like a separate testing data set. We did kind of cross validation through there, and we actually ended up being a pretty similar results when we looked across all the cross validation stuff too. So we felt pretty comfortable with our idea behind this and use this thing to just kind of throw this model at the 100 million participants that we have and just see if we can come up with and just kind of dig through all that data and try to find interesting things from it. So linking ourselves to our some of the results for the first research question, so is the meta composition dominant? The answer is, as you get, yes, it kind of is in the sense that a lot of people are using, especially when we get up to that ranked play. We saw kind of going from the casual play up to the kind of dependent play. We go from about half of the teams doing the kind of the standard approach to almost 3/4 of them. And it's also kind of a safe choice because you win about half the time. Not surprisingly, because you're likely to be playing this in a meta team. One of the interesting things is that it's slightly above 50%, which also means that it might be a little bit better against like other compositions in general. But we did find a few kind of unique combinations that were not the typical meta that were actually better than that they did a better job than the meta actually did with it. And this was all just for multiple comparisons, 5% level, so it's like statistically significant type idea. So the most popular one was kind of dumping that top type character and actually throwing another mid in there. I suspect that we didn't dig too much into like the full details of this one, but really probably what it was is that you take like a more damaging type character, give her that tanky type person on top, and just say like the best defense is a good offense, so we can kind of kill them quicker and score more wins. Programmatic, we're probably going to do better. It appeared about 8% of the time across all the different matches that we saw. It was just slightly better than what the meta against the meta, but even like squeaking on a 1% increase in 1% is still a slight edge that you can get. I feel like this is the one crowd I don't have to convince that like small changes can actually be useful in the long run type idea. There were a couple of other rare but effective ones. Again, got cut off a little bit, but the interesting one I want to talk about is on the next slide anyway. So digging a little bit deeper into one of the kind of rare but effective compositions. So we had this one thing, I guess we just abbreviate TTMAS. So it was the 2 top, 1 mid, and the 2 bottom ones as well. So it's missing the jungler. And this one appeared in 0.2% of the matches, which sounds really rare, but given for 9 10 million matches, that's still a lot of data points in the grand scheme of things. So if you're able to like actually find rare compositions here, did actually really well. So 56% win rate versus kind of the standard meta. So that these little pack of people found a way to like beat the common crew. So again, that jungle. With that build, and then looked at like the predicted probability type idea, and instead of being just like slightly above a coin flip that over the top versus jungler, it really was that they were pretty clearly playing that, they were building that style. The other things with it is that we dug into just the winners from that pack. It turned out actually that if you look at, one of those two top players was actually still a dedicated jungler. And this was using some of the other end game like the statistics metrics that we have. There's some things that are very clearly like done that the jungler does differently than the rest of them. So we did include them in our kind of classification study just based on the fact that we only wanted to look at like how they were built. It seems like they were building differently, but still playing the same way, and they found a way to like use that to their advantage versus other people. So that last little bit actually kind of leads us into some future work that, especially with updates to what type of data we can collect now, that's going to make it a little more interesting. So the match timeline has now actually been added to the rankings API, so we can actually now track like kind of player progression, player movement through a lot of these games type thing, which is kind of cool, especially given like the earlier talks that I did hearing about how NHL doesn't really have that right now very well type thing. And I guess one of the nice things is that everything's running on the computer for these things, so it's just similar. It's just whether or not the companies really let you have it, and legal entities people do now. So what that means is that we can now actually follow that again, how they progress throughout that match, and we kind of give a little bit of an additional research question here, like can those rules shift mid-game, and is that what's kind of causing that the kind of competitive advantage? In particular, they're kind of looking at like that item classification, like is there some type of place where like we also switch over and be like, hey, you know what, I can, like we're doing well enough, I know when to make this switch to being able to say, I can get like the better items for like, kind of finishing off the game instead of the early parts of the game. I'm looking for that. And because now the fact that we actually just had that change, or the change actually was roughly a year ago, I think, and we didn't realize it until recently. It changed enough that we haven't been able to get the fresh data yet. We're currently trying to collect it yet, so I don't actually have anything to compare for the 2018 season. But we're currently kind of doing a slow crawl, getting like another several million match with that. And we're kind of interested to see like, are any of those trends that we saw, especially the non-meta trends, are they specific, or are they going to hold across this, or are they somewhat season specific and kind of being replaced by like new things in there as well as game keeps on kind of changing. So a lot of the usual things, like you see like a blip that in some type of other sports. Is it an actual trend, or is it just that you have to have like a player that have to have like a good run or something like that? All right, that's it. Thank you very much. And I guess there's probably a little bit of time for questions. And I just want to mention that there is some extra details about this. You can't really see it that well, but this is if you just go to what's called Foundation of Visual Games. The full city's on there. The PS got cut off on there. If there's any graduate students out here that are a statistician or data scientist, St. Louis University has a tenure track open, and that's what we're looking to hire. So if there's any there. The real reason why I was here.
All right, so Chris, come on down. We'll get you ready. Any questions for Ivan? Okay.
I'll stop asking.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, have you thought about or did anything with the betting market data that exists here? Because I think the composition stuff would be pretty interesting to look at how it relates to the market efficiency and basically what the odds are on teams.
That's actually, we have, but that's, that definitely is not something we have, but I can see that being pretty useful.
Any other questions down there? Yeah.
So I noticed some of the more successful, though rarer teams against the meta, I mean, it tend to be more and more rare as you went down them. Is there any sign of, as a team increase in frequency, that the effectiveness versus the meta or just in general decreases, or could it just be an expectation?
We didn't see, so all the rare ones, like the three the two that you kind of see on the slide there, it was a little bit, I mostly just highlighted the top percentage, but there was another pack of them there as well, that some of them were even less rare than the 0.2%, some of them weren't, so it was a little bit kind of different. I didn't see a specific trend. Besides this, that the most popular one was just like barely better, type thing than the meta. So it didn't necessarily seem that the more rare it was, the more effective it was. So it was just like a pack of rare ones. seemed like people had found some kind of strategy that was successful.
Anybody else? We good? Okay, thanks, Simon. All right. So here's Chris. We know Chris from Twitter is Yolo Pinato. His bio. The styling profile on Greyhound bus riding, seat of the pants flying, kiss stealing, doing, son of a gun. This better be good.
It's already out.
Okay. Cool.
So this is a picture of Justin Buckland and the halcyon days of him being a Blackhawks forward. And my presentation is called Ice Ice Baby. It's time for foreplay. So I'm gonna walk through basically why teams should start playing 4 forwards at 5 and 5. So some random guy that's here, Matt Kane, a few years ago suggested that teams should start thinking about playing 4 forwards when they're down late in the game. Matt Kane is super smart. He actually broke down the expected goals if the team were to take this approach. What he postulated was that if the team did take this approach, their goal differential would actually decrease. So they'd be outscored, but when you're down in the game, it doesn't matter anyway. You're trying to increase the variance and get the likelihood of you scoring up as much as possible. Let's see. Sorry. When I looked at this, I was thinking, well, how do you model out the actual effects of this? So when I looked across the sports, basketball, football, baseball, that have positional sort of switchability, every single model I look at, I think I looked at guard, sort of later in their career. All the models looked at what their stats were in the previous position and the stats were in the new position. The unfortunate problem with hockey is that you have a sample size of basically 2, Brent Burns and Dustin Buckland. So without any previous data to go off of, how do you sort of come to the conclusion that this is an effective strategy? So first, I will introduce my my previous talk from last year, the ice rating, basically using box score stats taken from Corsica and then using them to predict Corsi 4 and other on-ice effects without actually implementing those stats. And so last year presented it, this year going through this exercise, we tweaked it a bit, basically doubled the repeatability of sort of each metric of the stat. So just going through, and then 2 slight differences. So last year I had transition and 2-way play. Those now are neutral zone offense and neutral zone defense. And they have a very high correlation with Corey Snyder's carry-in and breakout percentage stats respectively. And then as you can see up here, these are the other ones. So when I look at how these effects or how these relate to on-ice shot rates, so we see that it has a pretty strong correlation with relative Corsi 4 percentage, strong correlation with relative expected goals percentage. And so what I did next was I looked at how how combining the ice ratings of the defensive pairing sort of related to their actual on-ice performance. So the easiest way to find out how a defensive pair will play with each other is just to look at their Corsi 4 percentage. Obviously, there's some issues with that because basically one informs the other. But if I were to look at, for example, comparing last year's ice rating to this year's Corsi 4 percentage, the ice rating did just as well as looking at last year's Corsi 4 between the two players. So similarly, looking at this year's results, similar effect, pretty strong correlation, close to what you would have when you combine the Corsi 4 ratings of both players together. Yeah, this is repeat. Okay. All right, so anyways, to go back, using the ICE ratings, basically what I did is I threw them in the PCA model and try to figure out if the model can tell who was a forward and who was a defenseman just by looking at the ICE ratings. And so if you look on the left, you'll see it's populated with a lot of orange dots. Those are the defensemen. On the right, the green dots are forwards. There's some leakage in the bottom right of more offensive defensemen, so everybody you would think of, Doug Hamilton, Dustin Bufflin, Victor Hedman, and so on and so forth. In the top left, this is more of the defensive forward, fourth line, grinder / defensive defenseman. This top left quadrant. And this is actually the quadrant that we're going to focus on. Basically, what we want to prove is that these forwards in the right scheme or in a particular pinch, your top two defensemen are injured and you have them called guys in the AHL. These guys can actually shadow as defensemen in the right scheme, and we'll sort of show what that means for the teams. So basically, the model identifies sort of what are the key variables between the two classes. So zone start percentage for forwards, Corsi against 60 for defensemen was the most predictive variables. The first thing I did was I created this thing called forward and score, and basically I looked at it was saying it was basically a classification problem. And so what I said was, if I throw all the ICE ratings into the classification model, how well will it predict that this player is a forward or a defenseman? And so ran around the force model, got a 98% accuracy rate. The first thing that's a little bit too good, that really gets solved for what I was trying to get to. I already know who's the forward and who's the defenseman. That's not what I was actually trying to drive for. And so the forward and score, at least the first iteration of it, had a very good repeatability, all that stuff, but that's not actually what I wanted. So I did a follow classification. The model has beer goggles now, and what previously looked like a forward, in the right light, now sort of looks like a defenseman. So the accuracy rate went down a little bit, but there's much more overlap as you can see visually. And this forward and the score, still has a pretty high correlation, but went down just a bit. So now we can use that to project, which of these forwards can best moonlight as a defenseman and see what the effects are. So just quickly breaking down my position, sort of as I expected and unsurprisingly, down in the bottom left is left wingers. And so if you look from left to right on the scale, left is more classifying more as a defenseman, right is classifying more as a forward. So centers are sort of all across the distribution, defensemen even more so. Basically, there's no wingers. Very few right wingers that would classify as defensemen, and then a couple of left wingers, but not nearly as much as centers. So as you would expect, centers have more defensive responsibility, and so those are obviously the class of people that you would think would be best capable to do this. And so one of the things that really stood out to me was the class of individuals who actually qualified as forwards, who qualified more as defensemen. This dotted line being the average forward and scorer across the whole entire population. The class of forwards that did it were often, former stars that sort of, didn't have the wheels to keep up as a forward, but still had a lot of physicality. So bigger forwards, think Jerome Ginla a couple years ago, Alex Burrows last year, and then sort of underutilized forward prospects. Jacob Grana, Jonathan Drouin his rookie year. Those are the ones that crossed over the most into this defensive category. And then vice versa, all the offensive defensive that you could think of. There's some outliers that were pretty interesting as defensemen that cross over in the forwards, but it's pretty interesting. So just quickly looking, I used 2016, 2017. The reason why I didn't use this past year is because for whatever reason, and I have to double check this because it's been showing up quite a bit, people play much, much faster according to my ice ratings. This season they only won, and that was like one of the biggest predictors of the increase in scoring. And so actually the data wasn't that great for this particular exercise. But last year, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, Claude Giroux, and Jacob Voracek, because I think he sucked last year. So it suggests that he would be a defenseman, better served as a defenseman. And then LA, some younger forwards, more physical forwards, and then Thomas from Montreal. I think probably would have been better served playing defense this year as well. I think Toronto could use it. So when we look at this sort of overall effect, not that great, to be perfectly honest. There was a small but statistically significant effect on shot outcomes. Basically, when I looked at the combined forwardness rating of the defensive pair, it had a slight increase on the overall shot effects, but that was the sort of biggest driver of it. Asking why I use a polynomial over here, I think that's how the graph looked, and didn't switch to another one. But when I look, so to try to actually model out the impacts, I looked at the 350 forwards that most classified as defensemen, saw what team they were on for any particular season, figure out the worst defensive pairing, and just slotted them into the worst defensive pairing. And so it's not the final version of the table, but just to quickly go through last year's data. So on average, depending on the penalty, we use the ice rating. So basically, for like skating, for example, I reduced their skating ability to sort of more correlate with them being a defenseman. Same thing with shooting ability. I used two different ones. One that was informed by sort of Dustin Bufflin and then Burns conversion, and then one that was just the average of the forwards divided by the average of the defensemen in each of those ratings. And what that final outcome was, I got about on average, a 0.5 to 1.5 increase in corkscrew percentage for that particular pairing. So from last year, Alex Mistrov and Ben Hutton, they were a pairing. I forgot who Hutton's defensive partner was in Vancouver. Same thing with Josh Hall, playing against Seidenberg. And then these last three are interesting. And so Alex Burrows, Chris Domenico, and Chalapik were all paired up with Ben Harper. Who wants to guess who was the replacement player for this particular pairing? Anybody? It is our great friend and recent arbitration winner, Kobe Cece. Basically, the model suggested that any replacement level forward that the Senators had, or just a random guy off the street would be a better defensive partner than Kobe Cece. There was actually quite a few pairs that had Kobe Cece being replaced across like multiple seasons. This is just the most recent example. So yeah. So going forward, I think I would want to dive in. I actually am running a model right now that I think will actually have more of an increase in the overall effect of this. But I think the biggest takeaway to me was that teams that either, for example, Chicago Blackhawks that are struggling to put out an NHL caliber defenseman, but have a glut of forwards or young players that struggle to get on the ice. I think teams that are better served to take this approach, increase the overall risk profile of their teams, and just sort of see what the outcome is. And then we'll probably see, my speculation is in 5 to 10 years, this will be a regular effect going forward. Thank you.
All right, before we take our first break, any questions for Chris over here? Any over here? All right.
Hey Chris, so in your first version of the model where you were trying to predict whether someone was a forward or a defenseman, it was very clearly defined that you had the defenseman on one side and the forwards on the other. And then in your second version, there was a lot more overlap. What changed in your models and what changed in the inputs that resulted in change?
Great question. It was actually a very simple thing. So look at shooting percentage, and basically, yeah. And then I was like, yeah, this is why it's way too good. Like anybody could have did that, and so yeah, that made a difference in the classification.
Any other questions here? Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, yeah, so we're great on time, so let's come back, let's say 10:15.
Maybe I'm more overall. I was like, okay. We're good? Yeah. I saw this morning. Okay, yeah. It was Jeff Barrett. It's because like I like Jeff Barrett a lot. I felt bad because like I understand the backlash, but like I don't think he meant it. Yeah. I thought he thought that he was being vague enough. He should have realized that right away. The internet is going to be like, we can figure this out. It was, yeah.
I think the idea was.
That's where you're in.
Kids are all talking about this.
Yeah.
So I could just say, this is a very topical thing for kids these days.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be more of like a general interest story, like, so kids these days are playing Fortnite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like good news, drug use is down. Bad news, Fortnite use is up. I'll be back. Sorry, I didn't want to leave the middle of the conversation. Yeah. Hot summer, get the sprinkles out.
Oh, yeah. It was passing. Very good. It's a like it's fast. It's fast. And you know every player by like you don't need to see the numbers like that's that. It's that. Plus, like, do you know how to follow that? So that's one thing. How do you know that's about it? That's the finish count. You don't go that. Okay. But like, he's on like a 1 year intro. Oh, you know what I mean? Oh, so he's going to actually qualify for the intro, so qualified. Oh, I don't know that. It's like, you have to stay. You don't want to check this. If I remember right, if they have actually spent me, so basically, contact on the end of that, and then it's like, you have to stay by your first person. That's 30 minutes. Travel. Okay. Suddenly, just very shocking. I thought like I told like I would. Okay, sure. Like it's interesting. If you were promoted promotion, but like if you're like I got yeah, some science. But yeah, I would be underestimating that's factor. So you just email them that you help before you do this. Started with after someone yeah. You were like right, that's true. We started offering we were like, oh, thanks for telling us we're never going to put this together. Like basically that's very so it's it was like basically the side of California don't know that was the takeaway from this, and you're like, oh, so it's so don't like please don't yeah this we don't want this. Do you do like based on license? Yeah. Yeah. It's good. It's good to oh yeah, that's my thing. So, so they would argue if the sign was right. Like that.
I mean, it was, it is not.
And like it's pretty smart. Yeah. Okay. They were like, that's not true.
Yeah.
But it's July, so they're like, so guess what? You're gonna have money. So they, I'm sure they, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. But the best part is to like other homes. This is like the level.
I opened it. Okay. My keyword is lots of places.
That's good. All right, so.
We don't really need to introduce ourselves. Is this still working? Yep. All right.
Ready when you are to start us off here.
Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started again. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming back. Our next speakers are me and Ryan. And we've already introduced ourselves a little bit. But what was that?
Who are you?
So my name is Matt Hoffman. I'm a mathematician, and my background is in numerical weather prediction. And now, for the past few years, I've been working with Ryan in combination with our RIT hockey team. Right? So this is going to be talking about college hockey a little bit. So we've been working with the hockey team for the past 3 years here. RIT is a D1 hockey team. And so we've been helping them out with some of their analytics, meeting with the coaches on a semi-regular basis to talk to them about players. And so we've been doing this for 3 years. Organizing this conference before, we felt like maybe it was time to actually talk a bit about what we've been doing. And part of this is because we certainly hear in all of these talks about the NHL that there's a data scarcity issue that's only larger in the college world. And so quickly I want to tell you about the data that we have. Actually, this is data that we've been collecting along with some students in RIT. So when we started this, we wanted to write something to do the logging, right, so that we could try to get some data. I actually started writing an app in MATLAB, and fortunately, the advantage of working at a tech school, I had a student who was like, "Oh, I've been kind of meaning to practice writing HTML5. I could help you with that." I was like, "Okay, great." So Ben Liu, who was a master's student, is now a PhD student at University of Washington, wrote an app, and I just want to show you so that you know what we're dealing with. Right. So this is HTML5. The idea was just that you could. The other advantage working with the team is we would get cutoffs of just the shots, right? So we didn't have to go through the whole game. But they would just send us the pre-cut shots that they would be using. So in the app, you could play the video and then record just by clicking, right? Either the location of a shot and the location of a pass, right? So just by clicking, you could mark the location. There's a place to label information about who was on the ice, who took the shot. Information about the shot. So all that was there, and what happened, and when you could do that. Once you did that, you could basically just log the shot. It would show up, and then you could actually output it, right? And it just goes out to a text file, right? So that way, so we had a few students every year who would help us with this. So we did some of the games ourselves. And at this point now we have 3 years worth of data, right? So I thought it was time now to start taking a look at it. And so that's what you're going to hear about here. Again, let me show you what we have, right? So this is, again, 3 years worth of college data. Obviously, every game is RIT on one side. But so all told, we've got just over 7,000 shots. 5,400 of which are 5-on-5. There you can see them plotted, right? RIT and opponent. So of those shots, right, 623 goals, 408 of which were 5-on-5 shots. So again, this is the data set that we have right now. For our college, pretty good. Obviously, we wish it was larger. But it's interesting just to take a look and see how this college set compares to the NHL, right? So Emmanuel Perry's 2015 NHL data we've had for a bit to try to do expected goals for the team using those shooting percentages. This is a comparison about how the NCAA data compares to those shooting percentages from different regions. So again, NCAA is in red, NHL is in blue, and areas where the NCAA is greater is red shaded. And on the left, you see shooting percentage. On the right, you see shot distribution, right? So you notice, I think, a couple of things. In general, it seems like the shooting percentages at the NHL level are much greater especially in sort of the home plate area right there. But if you look at the college game, a lot more of the shots seem to happen there, which contributes to sort of a higher overall shooting percentage. And when I'm talking about shooting percentage here, this is shooting percentage for all shots. Even though the app allows you to distinguish between block shots, shot on goal versus shot off target, I don't really trust the data from the video. I mean, I tracked some of it, and I don't really trust it. It's very hard to tell whether something was on target or not, whether it was blocked. And so most of what we look at is just all shots. Okay. Anyway, this just gives you a flavor of what the data looks like. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this, and again, the title had to do with influence of passing, was to actually, since we have primary passing information, see what the influence is, right? So, as I said, we're just starting this analysis, and so we wanted to be as simple, build as simple a model as possible. So we first just built a simple regression expected goals model, just to try to take a look at the kind of analysis we can do with this. Again, just in doing the regression, you can see shot distance, angle versus shooting percentage, change in angle versus shooting percentage, and pass distance versus shooting percentage. So again, definitely a non-linear with shot distance. So in doing the linear regression, we fit a quadratic to shot distance. And we started just by doing everything else linear. Again, just to start simple. So when you build this regression model, you get expected goals from just an unassisted shot that looks something like this at the college level. And actually, these nice sort of flame-shaped regions in the linear model. Everything is symmetric in this model by design, right? Because we're using absolute value of angle and change in angle. And this does compare reasonably, right? This is from Michael McCurdy. So this is his of shooting percentages actually in the NHL. Here's the expected goals in college, at least. Again, qualitatively, you see some similar behavior in both of these. So, I mean, again, this is a simple first model, but it's at least a reasonable place to start. As we get more data, we're looking to build something more sophisticated, but instead of really going into those details, I mean, I was playing around with a couple things, right? So here's a variation, which is a logistic model. So this is, again, logistic regression, and actually now breaking symmetry by making the angle fourth degree is a tiny bit of asymmetry in the angle of the shot. Actually, the goals were slightly higher expected goals when shooting to the blocker side versus the glove side in the college data. Anyway, these are just two models that we'll then use in talking about how we do the analysis. When taking a look at the linear model, again, you can take a look at the coefficients. So you can see the coefficients in front of, again, shot type, shot distance, shot angle, which for the linear model is absolute value. Same with the change in angle from the pass and the pass distance. So we ran the regression with passes and without passes, right? And so when you don't include the pass, the R-squared was about 0.69. When you include passes, you went up to 0.77 in that model. Okay, so again, just a simple model in trying to do expected goals to try to understand this, which is the value of making a pass. So I turn it over to Ryan.
All right, thank you, Matt. So in looking at all this data, looking at this regression model, we can kind of look at, a bunch of different things that we weren't able to before, using a lot of the limitations present in the NHL data, right? So we can look at, partly we can look at decision-making on the ice, right? So what's the expected goals of the pass location versus where the subsequent pass led to another shot. Right? So is there an increase or decrease in that puck movement, prior to the shot taking place? Which is kind of a black hole that we have in NHL data with not a lot of, XY locations of passes or anything like that. So it's kind of a way to, okay, can we find some sort of value in measuring the passing angle, the impact it has on scoring, and then can we kind of filter that down to, as Ivan mentioned, you want to describe, predict, and then prescribe. So is this something we can take to the players and talk about decision making, right? So this is a little fun with binning. We can do, we run the regression and everything continuously, but this is purposely just done to kind of show the effect. The angle change from, a shot over here, versus over there, how you can see the angle change and corresponding shoot percentage as it, rises. Okay, so here's an example. This is the first model we've talked about right now. Yeah. So this is a linear model looking at, the X on there is where the shot was taken from, an unassisted shot. And then right next to it, you see the pass. You kind of see slightly different, again, that's represented in there. You want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what you see in this images, right? The X would be the location of the player. So you get the value of the shot if the shot was taken from that location. And then the color here would represent either any gain or loss in expected goals if that player were to pass and a shot would be taken from that pass location, right? So if you look at a place where it's green, that means that if that player were to pass and a shot would be taken from that location, it would improve the expected goals. You notice that in the right figure, right, the location came from a pass, and so the region has changed size, right, because the value of a shot from that location coming from a pass is higher.
And this is the same thing you're seeing in the logistic model. Slightly easier to see on this one, I think. Okay, so with all this information, including pass distance, pass angle, and expected goals, we see the overall correlation increase in the model from that 0.69 to about 0.77. So that means that players must have a tremendous impact on their shooting percentage based on the angles that they're passing from, right? Not really, right? It's a very small piece of what goes into scoring a goal, right? There's the distance, there's the shot type, there's the pass distance, there's that angle, angles for both shots and passes. So, it's something incredibly small that we're looking on, but, it's as Matt said, this is kind of like a exploratory look at this for the first time in public, so we just don't have this data available. So what can you do with it, right? Like, what can we look at, how impactful angle change is and how likely, like how possible is it to, from a coaching standpoint, then take this information and say, okay, well, we're going to increase the angle of our passes. Well, how exactly do you do that, right? It's easier said than done. So going back to one of the first things we talked about is the cumulative change or per shot assist change for a number of RIT players over the last 3 years in basically increasing the likelihood of a goal using the expected goals location, XY location where they make the pass versus where the shot is eventually taken. Okay. Jake Hammaker, he was freshman last year, right? Freshman last year, yeah. So good start to his collegiate career. We'll see how that goes. Josh Mitchell was a senior when we started working with the team a couple years ago. Just a ton of assists, really good passer. You kind of filter down the list. Obviously, nobody here knows about these players because nobody cares about Atlanta County. But some interesting numbers. Again, it's a very small slice of how players perform. Right? It's very, very important to. We can't overstate this enough. Really, it's like this is a small piece of what they do. It doesn't swamp out like their overall impact. It's just a kind of a new way of looking at player evaluation and on-ice decision making. Right? Which leads us right to the limitations, right? Without spatial tracking, there's a big component we're missing here. Right? I can pass it to Matt. Matt can then skate 30 feet and take a shot over there. We don't have a third data point kind of measuring the distance the player travels with the puck on his own. Right? So there's a large component there that's missing because certain players will undoubtedly be better, whether it's through skating, whether it's stick handling, of increasing the likelihood of scoring a goal simply from their movement with the puck, right? Also, without spatial tracking, you don't know necessarily if there's a better option available, right? So you can credit a player with, making a pass, lead to a shot, lead to a goal. What was the best play available, right? So even as we get more data, it just raises more questions about our limitations and why we all do this, right? And obviously, one team college hockey, you can't really sign free agents, you can't make trades during the season. So a lot of the focus and research Matt and I do is about improving team performance, right? It's very, and these are very small margins, right? You're improving kind of on the peripheral of, overall how the team performs, shot selection, roster optimization, things like that. So if we look at, the average pass angle on or shot assist from RIT forward over the last 3 years was 34 degrees, right? So they're changing, the angle the goalie sees about 34 degrees on average for shot assist, right? So how can that be improved? And I'll shut up about this once teams get smart about it. But if you play from behind the net, the average angle change on shot assist from behind the net goes up to 89 degrees, right? And think about that. I mean, it's all logical, right? A lot of research people do, it ends up being logical in that you're forcing the goalie to turn their head more, right? You're creating an advantage from behind the net where defensemen now can't have everything in front of them looking behind them as well, right? So there's some added benefit that's included in here, but it's not due just to the angle change, right? But it's important to know. So how can we do that? You can say, play behind the net more. Well, here's a way to kind of quantify and measure that, the impact it would have on scoring, right? You have, let's say, through coaching, through repetition, through added focus on the players and the coaching staff, you say, okay, we're gonna generate, and you do all that, let's say your output is you get 2 more shot assists from below the end line in a game, right? It's not a lot, but it's reasonable. It's a reasonable expectation, right? No team's gonna play their entire offense from that low, but if you can put an emphasis on it, maybe you see a gradual change, a small incremental increase in that. So then you kind of swap out the change in angle. You do, so each of those, 89 degrees, so 2 of them, you have 178 degrees. If you're replacing essentially 2 average shots, let's say, you're losing 68, you're gaining 178. It's an increase of 110 degrees per game. You're making goalies work a little bit harder in a game, right? So then going back to the regression at the player level, right? So you look at the coefficient of 0.01 per degree in angle change, and these do accumulate rather quickly. So then you're looking at about a tenth change and increase in shooting percentage in a given game, right? Very, very small amounts. But you look at that cumulative change over the fact of a season, 3 seasons, the team would have added 22 goals over 3 seasons. Again, that's not a lot. Like 100 games, we're dealing with very small amounts, right? So about 7 per season. How do you kind of measure that? Well, RIT lost 10 one-goal games last year. They finished 3 points out of a bye in the first round playoffs. That kind of stuff, can matter. So, again, incremental improvement is still improvement. A lot of the gains that we make in the fields are the small variety at this point, and also measuring things on the ice that we couldn't measure before and finding out, what matters, how much. This is a very, very small piece. It's very interesting because it offers you a new way to look at things. But again, we don't want to overstate the importance of the findings because they're exploratory and also, again, very, very small influence. So one thing you can do, and these are 2 short clips from the RPI RIT game many of you attended last year, which RIT lost, was it 8-3? Yeah. So that was a great time. After we spent all day telling them how we helped the team, right? Yeah. So this is basically looking at the shot location before a pass of about 1%, and then looking at where it's eventually taken from about 20%. So that's Jake Hammaker, in front. Again, not looking to shoot it off the goalie's pads for a rebound. Right here, it's Adam Brubaker, defenseman jumping into the play. Could have shot that, looking for a rebound. Instead, has a little bit more patience. Ultimately looks for an open player there. So you're increasing, you can tell a player, hey, you're increasing your likelihood of scoring there from 1 to 10 or 1 to 20. Right, but that's an obvious situation, right? Anytime you can pass across the slot, it's obvious, it's hard to do. So another way you can do this is looking at, shot selection, certain players. This is Ruben Triptow, I think. Looking at where he is, almost, tops of the face-off circle, the goalie is set, how can you increase a good scoring opportunity? It doesn't have a lot of options there. So that small angle change, you know, can move from like 1 to 5%. Again, not a huge amount of difference, but you know, with how many shots and possessions teams have, these small changes add up in a big way. If you can get the whole team to buy in, if you can, you know, commit to the numbers. Right. Anyone on that? Okay, so then, yeah, we're done.
Good, yeah. So, basketball question here. My question is, so often in basketball and the NBA, certain players, obviously passing is good in both hockey and basketball, but in basketball, certain players are considered assist hogs, where they purposely hold on to the ball until the optimal opportunity comes up for them to get an assist or some important event that optimizes their stats at the expense of the offense of the rest of the team. Is that a possibility here with sort of taking this approach? Yeah. So basically, like some guy holding on to a puck, waiting for someone to get at the exact right angle instead of moving it.
So yeah, I would say, I mean, it's something the coaches complain about with certain players, definitely. And I was actually just looking at that and noticing that at least one player that they complained about that actually didn't show up very well in this model. So that's, yeah, I think probably there's obviously some danger, but I would imagine it's on the lower side until you get more wide adoption of that sort of thing.
So I guess the follow-up to that is something you all were looking at per shot assists instead of maybe cumulative. So but it makes shorter passes or whatever.
Right.
The back passes.
Yes. Awesome. Right. Yeah. So we're just looking at one shot prior, just based on technical limitations. I agree that looking at more passes and small passes would be a good step if possible.
Yeah, behind you. Yeah, certainly, Chris, just the limit of what we have to work with. And, but I agree.
So, with regards to the angle change, do you have any intuition if the phenomenon of how the angle change affects either shooting percentage or just like what the goalie's reaction would be? If that changes from like a 90-degree pass behind the net versus a 90-degree pass across the crease, because like just intuitively to me, the behind the net one, the goalie might still be hugging the post, but his head is on a swivel, versus the cross crease one would involve lateral movement. Do you have any intuition as to whether or not there's any distinct phenomenological difference between those two types of angle changes?
Yeah, I mean, when we looked at like cross-slot passes, the average angle change was only about like 70 degrees. So, obviously there's a lot more going on there, like to your point, like it can have greater angle effect from behind the net, but may not force it to move across the entire slot, right? So there's a lot of moving parts with each one. For sure.
I thought about including sort of the XY location of both players to try to include them in the model. That wasn't really doing much at that point, but there's also a data issue there.
So just to make sure I'm following you guys here, Matt, your sort of prescribed change of how this stuff can come about and help a team is coming from the coefficients in your regression on the angle, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did you look in the data if there's a correlation at all between shot angle and any of your other regressors, like shot type?
So it's a great question that I haven't really delved into too much. I've taken a look just at how things change, including different variables to get a little bit, but I haven't actually looked at correlations.
It might just be some multi-collinearity that's actually throwing off. Like, it's probably understated. When you had said it didn't look like there was much of a relationship between the shot angle and that one you put up.
Right.
If your coefficients are not good.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the coefficients are influenced by the data we have, right?
Right.
If we had every NCAA team over the last 3 years, certainly those change. I mean,
If you're throwing a different model where you actually can get rid of some of the stuff, you may be able to show a larger effect.
Yeah.
If you get rid of your multi-collinearity.
Yeah, and if it exists too.
Right.
Yeah, it might be as high as it gets, right? Yeah. But I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions, or
I think we should move on.
Okay. Never mind. That often, that
Oh, okay, fine. And then you have a question?
often. Technically, we have 3 more minutes.
Okay.
Whatever.
I'm sorry, I
No, you ruined it.
Okay.
Okay, we're moving on. I'll introduce you. All right, so this is a really cool moment. For those that know Asma Toomey, she was here last year. Yeah, she ran the our workshop in the Meet in Dawson last year. She started a mentorship program through Hockey Graphs. Various people in this room were part of it. Judy is my mentee. So, Judy has done a lot of good work, analyzing a lot of shots, a lot of power play information on Boston University. She graduated there in 2016 in journalism with a minor in statistics. She covered the BU men's hockey team as a student journalist, 2015-16, has worked with Trackman for the Cape Cod Baseball League. Her major focus since graduating is the data tracking for the London Knights, and most recently, the team we all love to hear about, the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Judy is, again, it's a really cool moment for me, the mentorship program. If you're interested in hearing more about that, reach out to us after, but Judy is going to be great, and that's the end of that story, regardless of how she presents. So.
All right, hi, I'm Judy, like Ryan said. I'm going to be talking about the 2016-17 Boston University Power Play today. This is going to be basically an excerpt of the project I was working on, kind of an abridged version, because all the stuff I did cannot fit into 20 minutes. So if you want to look at it later, it's on my blog, which is judypuck.wordpress.com. So this is just a general overview detailing what went into the project. So I wanted to look at BU's top 2 power play units during that season. And I defined that as the 2 units most frequently used during the season based on the video that I had. So I only had access to 21 games, 16 of which were home games. If you know college hockey, total games in a season is usually 38 to 40, depending how far you go in the playoffs. But the power play did not actually perform statistically significantly better at home than on the road, despite their stark difference in home record versus road record, which you can see here. They were 13-3-2 at home and 8-6-1 on the road. So the power play 1 that I was looking at was used 31 times over 7 games for about 32 minutes of ice time. And power play 2 was used 17 times in 6 games for a little under 13 minutes. So you can see already this is a very small sample size. And because of that, we're not, making any sweeping generalizations here about how the power play performs in general against certain penalty kills or how they perform as a whole. But we're just looking at these 2 specific power plays and how they did while they were on the ice for BU. So Ryan and Matt just went through this, but when I was tracking shots and passes, I used the tool that they showed you. Basically, it gives you XY coordinates for events that you want, in addition to shot angle, shot distance, pass distance, and a bunch of other stuff you can put in and get out. I then exported that data as a CSV and used Python, specifically Matplotlib and Seaborn, to create visualizations of what I tracked. So to get into the actual hockey part of this, Power Play 1 ran a 1-3-1 power play with 4 forwards and 1 defenseman. You can see here they were very mobile. They kind of moved all over the ice and would slot in for each other, so it didn't always look like this. For the most part, it did for shots, but they would move around. So you have Jordan Greenway in front of the net there, number 18. Jacob Forsback Carlson in the slot, 23. Charlie McAvoy on that left side, number 7. Patrick Harper on the right side, number 21. And then Clayton Keller at the point, basically doing whatever he wanted. So compare that to Power Play 2, which was a split power play run with 3 forwards and 2 defensemen. It was very stationary. They basically looked like this the whole time. You have Patrick Curry in front of the net there, Bobo Carpenter in the left circle, Kiefer Bellows in the right circle, Chad Chris at the left point, and Dante Fabro at the right point. And something that I just wanted to point out is that all 4 wall guys, boards guys, are all on their offside. So Charlie and Bobo shoot right-handed, but they're on the left side, and Harper and Bellows shoot left-handed, so they're on the right side, and that's just a way to use the one-timer better. So this is an overview of each power play's shot outcomes and locations. You can kind of see the general shapes here. It's a little messy on power play 1 side, but you can see that general diamond and the slot presence that's there. And then if you look at power play 2, it's a smaller sample, so it is kind of bare, but you can see distinct areas where they were. You can see where Carpenter was in that circle. You can see Fabro's like chunk of shots off that right point, and you can see Curry kind of in the front of the net. So power play a 11 blocked shots, where power play 2 had 12 shots on goal, 13 with that goal from Carpenter from the left circle, and 11 misses and 9 blocked shots. And then if you can't really see the shots on goal are the circle, the blue circles, goals are the green diamonds, blocked shots are the red triangles, and missed shots are purple X's. And this, I mean, I just wanted to show basically the variance in shot distance for both power play units. So I just kind of wanted to show that if you look at power play 2, a lot of their shots are coming from the same general distance, especially Chris and Fabro. They stayed really close to that blue line. They stayed really far out. Kiefer Bellows did not really move a whole lot as well. It's kind of like a 2-foot difference in shot distance. Curry, you can see, didn't get more than 8 feet away from the net for a shot. Whereas power play 1, there was some more variance there. There's still some people that didn't vary their shot distance a ton, like Harper usually stayed kind of level. But you look at like Keller all over the place. McAvoy even would get closer to shoot the puck. And so I'm going to show a couple examples of player profiles that I did. So this is Clayton Keller because he's Clayton Keller. He was all over the ice. As you can see, he shot from all over, and you haven't seen any other people's pass maps yet, but this is a lot going on here. He had 71 total passes in the time on ice that he had, which you'll see in a second. But I did want to note that a lot of his passes went to Harper and McAvoy in that high triangle up here. So a lot of them went to Harper in that right circle, and then a lot of them went to McAvoy in the left circle. I think it's 25 to Harper and then 24 to McAvoy. So also you'll see some dotted line passes here, and that just means that those are not direct paths to the end of that pass. So the straight solid lines that's the exact path the pass took, and the dotted lines are indirect, so maybe it went off the boards or it was rimmed around until it got to that destination. I just wanted to show you though that those were the shots started. So Clayton Keller had a lot of primary shot assists. He was the quarterback of this power play. And you can see that obviously these passes come from a large range of places. And for power play 2, Chad Chris kind of captained that power play and had a lot of primary shot assists. But you'll see the difference in his pass map is kind of funny if we just go to it right now. So that's Chad Chris. He did not move. All of those passes are from, except 3 of them are from within like 15 feet of the blue line. He had 3 shot attempts. 2 of them did get through though, so good for Chad. But if you look at this, you can see where his passes are going. It's not as much variability for their destinations, whereas Clayton Keller kind of put it all over the place. Chad put it in these very specific places that don't really yield super dangerous shot attempts. So on average, actually, you'll see this in the next slide. It's just a large table, so I want to talk about it right now. But shots taken after Clayton Keller passes were on average about 29 feet, and shots taken after Chad Chris passes were about 39 feet out. So there is that difference too. And so this is what I was talking about. These are just individual primary shot assist rates. So you can see their total number of passes, how many of those passes were shot assists, what percent of their passes were shot assists, just so you can see easily. So for example, Chad Chris has 30 passes, 10 of them were shot assists, 33% of his passes were shot assists. There's no time on ice in seconds, and then we can extrapolate that out to shot assists per 60, which you have to be careful with because it's a very small sample size, as you can see. But if we do look at that, you can see that Chris and Keller are operating at similar rates for their shot assists, but we look back at where the locations of their passes were going, and we look at the average shot distance after their passes are, and you can see there is some difference there as well. And then bottom 3 rows are for each unit, their rates and totals and stuff like that. So these slides will be up after. You don't have to read all of the numbers right now. It's a lot of them, I know. And we're not trying to equate Kristen Keller here. I'm not saying that Chad Chris is Clayton Keller. I'm just saying that where Keller ran PP1, Chad Chris was responsible, along with Dante Favreau, for power play 2. Now we're going to shift into the second half of this presentation, which is passes against the penalty kill. This is another slide with a lot of numbers, so just take it as you will. I'm just trying to show the top table. We're going to talk about the different power penalty kills that be faced over this sample of games. So they played each of these teams once, except they played Maine twice in a home and home one weekend. The power play 1 and power play 2 columns just indicate whether that particular unit faced that team in that penalty kill shape. So you can see here I've labeled what each team ran. We're going to look at a 1-1-2 and a wedge +1 in a second. So if you want to look at those in the bottom 2 tables, which are the shot rates for each penalty kill power play unit, and then the pass rates for each power play unit against those. So if you look at that briefly, you can see that power play 2's shots per 60 against the 1-1-2 was higher than power play 1, but they played way less time. You can see their time on ice. So we don't want to, you don't know if that's going to be maintained, but it is interesting to look at. And for passes, power play 2 was passing at a much higher rate against the controlled penalty kill and against the wedge +1. And you will see why in a second. So this is a 1-1-2 penalty kill. It is set up similar to wedge +1, which you see in a second. It starts to look like this. You have 3 guys in front of the net there in the slot, and then you have 1 guy up top. But instead, it's unlike a wedge +1, which sends that top guy out to chase the puck. You actually send 2 guys out to chase the puck. In that second diagram, you can see it with, let's pretend the puck is in the corner there. You send 2 guys out, and then you leave 2 in the slot there, kind of in a vertical line guarding that area. So Maine used this penalty kill against both power play units. And here are power play 1 and power play 2's passes against the 1-1-2 penalty kill. So I chose these 2 to show you. I have other ones too, but because there's a large sample of passes here, so you can actually see a good shape for power play 1. You can see that concentration on the right side between Keller and Harper, and if you look, you can see, I don't know if you remember player numbers, but those are basically what each color dot corresponds to. It's probably not super clear, the color distinction right now on here, but you can look at it later. Yeah, there is that distinction there, and they're sending some passes toward the front of the net there, which is good. Unlike power play 2, where you're and then we're going to look at this in a different way. So this is just another way to look at it. This is power play 1. Both of these charts are power play 1. Their pass starts, first pass ends. I didn't know how to put them on one chart without it being overwhelming, so they are in 2 different charts. But you can see how much of power play 1 just kept their starts, their passes on the perimeter there. There's really nothing closer than the face-off dots and nothing encroaching past the center point. But you do see in the pass ends that they are getting pucks to the net and they are getting things in the slot. So that's good. And then you can see, again, that concentration on the right side between Keller and Harper passing back and forth to each other, along with some concentration on the left for McAvoy as well. And here is power play 2 against the 1-1-2 penalty kill. Again, that concentration between Dante Favreau and Chad Chris is very clear, and you can see that they do not have a lot going on down there. Part of the problem, as you saw earlier, for their setup is only 1 guy is below the face-off dots. You just have Curry in front of the net. Otherwise, everyone is up high, so you're kind of just trying to filter everything to Curry, which obviously happened once here. And this is a wedge +1 penalty kill, so it looks similar to the 1-1-2. But instead of having 2 guys go out, you have 1 guy go out and pressure the puck, and that guy can slide back in. You can send someone else back out, depending where the puck is. You don't just have to have this guy running around the zone. And then these are power play 1's passes versus the wedge +1 penalty kill. You can see there's a lot more presence in the middle. They actually got some stuff through the slot, which is awesome. Merrimack used this against Power Play 1, and UMass used this against Power Play 1 and Power Play. This is Power Play 2 passes against the wedge plus 1. You can see already there's a lot more going on down low than there was before. They're getting stuff down, which is good. It's much better than just having them be at the blue line. And I guess my assumption was that for wedge plus 1, you're having one person chase the puck and you have 4 guys on the perimeter. That's a lot of puck chasing compared to Power Play 1, where you only have 3 guys on the perimeter. So it's not as much puck chasing than if you're playing Power Play 2. So this is Power Play 1's density plots against the wedge plus 1 penalty kill. You can see again the pass starts are coming from closer inside. They're inside the face-off dots now, some of them, and they're still getting stuff to the front of the net as well. And you can see just that Keller dot in the center point there, just passing everything everywhere all the time. And this is 1-1-2 again. There is that concentration on the blue line between the defensemen who we have established run this power play, but there is a lot more going on down low and on the boards, which we didn't see before against the other penalty kill. So questions and goals. Obviously you want to look at larger samples of this data. This is very small and it doesn't tell us the time. It would be cool to look at an NHL team over the course of the season or a college team over the course of the season. And then from that, I'm kind of curious of what we can learn from these maps and how can they be used. Is there anything super valuable in them, or is it just kind of a cool way to visualize what's going on the ice? Could they be used in scouting or for individual player and tactic evaluation? And again, I really could not fit everything here. So if you like what you're seeing, I recommend going to my blog and reading what else I have there. There's more player profiles for everyone, primary shot assist locations, more penalty kill breakdowns, and breakouts and entries, which I could not even touch here. So, and then thank you to Ryan for helping make this project the best it could be. I was literally going to draw all of these charts by hand otherwise until he gave me location data, so that was awesome, and for answering any questions that I had all the time. Thank you to Matt Barlow for helping me with Python questions and showing me how cool Seaborn can be. Shout out to FC Python for inspiring these pass maps. They have a whole tutorial about doing it for soccer, so I just applied it to hockey using the data I had. And then to Hockey Plays and Strategies, that awesome book for being my textbook. And finally, thank you all for listening.
All right, so Jesse, why don't you come on down? We'll get some questions for Judy here. Yes, go ahead.
So for Power Play 1, it was obvious that Clayton Keller was the one who was making most of the passes happen. He was the main puck carrier, and he's the most talented player probably on that power play. He played on the point. Do you think that putting him there put the team at a disadvantage because he was far away from the net, or do you feel like it was beneficial because it gave him more space to operate as a passer?
I mean, he honestly, he went wherever he wanted. He was, he started in that formation there, but there's a lot of his data that comes from behind the net as well. So probably it might have helped to have him lower down, but I think maybe have McAvoy slide to that center point area. But I guess the way they wanted to do it was to give Clayton the whatever freedom he wanted to basically just run around the zone and move things around. It probably figured that he could pass the puck and have the most space there.
Obviously, this kind of goes against tradition, but what stock do you put into the idea that using defensemen on your power play may decrease its effectiveness in terms of Chad Chris just not moving at all?
Well, I think that was just the way that power play was set up, because they had Dante there and he didn't move either. BU actually ran a 5-forward power play the year Jack Eichel was there, and obviously did very well. They operated like at a very high rate. I think they were first or second in the country in power play percentage that year. So they've obviously tried that with the right personnel. I don't love that setup of power play 2. I think that's kind of a waste to have all your stuff going on down there. But that's what they went with, so.
All right, so up next is Justin McNulty. He's the manager of analytics for the Atlanta Blaze Professional Lacrosse Club. And unfortunately, we have to cut the stream for this talk as Jesse does not want his competitors to mean they should have come. So.